Hello and welcome to Build Up Electrics. I'm at home, as you can see. I've tidied the desk up, as you can see. Hopefully my mum will see it and stop complaining to me about it. And with a bit of luck and the following wind, what you can see on the monitor behind me is a drawing of a frame jig. The reason I'm making this slideshow is I've reached the point in the CB750 build where I'm building the frame on the jig, and there's probably things to discuss about jigs and frame building, but that's a discussion about jigs and fixtures, not a discussion about frame building. And the CB750 build is a frame build. Basically, a jig is a measuring device in the narrowest possible sense of the word, and in the narrowest possible sense of the word, a fixture is a device for holding things in the correct position while they are welded or glued or attached to each other so that the relationship remains the same. What that is behind me is a jig and fixture combined, and the thing can be both. If you take a measuring jig for crash repairing motorcycle frames, that is designed to let you apply forces with a hydraulic ram to various parts of it and measure the position of those bits and get them back in the relationship you want. It's not ideal for building motorcycle frames on because it is a measuring jig rather than a fixture. The original jig stroke fixture I was using was a piece of 6-inch wide C-section steel like that. Had a stick on the end of it that did that, and you could put a steering head on there and you could build things that sat on here and got the rest of it where you wanted it. The trouble with that was if you build in like a 26 degree race bike frame, then the stick is there. If you start building something with a bit more rake, like a custom bike or a chopper, then that comes down here, and then the headstock needs to go further up the stick to get the height above the base plate, and by now everything's hanging off the end of it, and it got to be a problem, I think. And the reason I built the jig that I built was that I'd set the old jig up to do something, and I was looking at it and I was going, this is just like too much trouble. So we ordered some steel, dug out some drawings that I'd done a few years before, and started building a jig. I've got some drawings and I've got some photos, and I'm going to talk my way through those. So let's get on with it. So this is the drawing I came up with. At the time there was a lot of discussion back and forth, ideas being batted around on the internet about how to build a frame jig. So some of this is probably derivative of other people's ideas, some of it's my own ideas, and which has been lost in the mist of time, I'm afraid. The idea is you've got two horizontal members which give you a face to build your frame up off of. You've got a vertical member which is true in all planes, and the idea being you measure the horizontal distances along the jig off of the upright member, and you measure the vertical distances off of the flat members. So that's what they're for. The way of making it was really, my original idea was to bolt everything together, so that you could true it all up, and then once it was all trued up you tack weld it together. The reason you tack welding it, not fully welding it, is that when you fully weld stuff distorts, and you don't want distortion in a jig, you want it to remain true. So with these drawings floating around, kind of knew what I was going to build, so the next thing to do was pop out and order some steel. Ended up ordering 3x2 because it was cheaper, and it was going to work. That was two 20-foot lengths. Then I've cut the two longitudinal members out at 10 foot 3 meters, and the vertical one on the right there, that's a 6 foot, possibly 2 meter piece, and the long piece on the left is the offcut that was used to make the rest of it. So once we cut some feet out, clamped everything up to have a look and see what it looked like. That was all good. Next thing to do is go around and take all the pointy bits off, because if you're going to be working around this thing, you don't want to be snagging clothes on it, snagging skin on it, leaking blood all over the place. It's not a good look really. So those bits are all tidied up quite thoroughly. Next thing was to drill the feet for the adjustable feet. Let's call them the legs. Drill the legs for the adjustable feet. So they were all marked up and drilled, and one of them got a hole cut in the side of it to bolt the vertical member to. So this would be the front leg. Okay, there's some Allen bolts serving as temporary feet in the legs. So everything all sort of positioned and stood up and starting to look like it might go together. Ran a straight edge across the top of it for a check. Put spirit level on one end of it. Put spirit level on the other end of it. Something wasn't quite right. Clamped the piece of stern and vise. Clamped the box section to the piece of stern and vise, and as you can see, the bubble was slightly off to the left because that's the way the bench leans. However, when you move the spirit level up the other end, the bubble's gone off on a 6-week vacation somewhere to the left, because it turns out that the box section was twisted. So to deal with that, we got a large wrench and put some muscle into it, and literally twisted it out straight again. So that's worth checking if you're building a jig, because that will make things unpleasant. While that was going on, I had machined up some adjustable feet, so the feet were adjustable, and drilled the vertical member so it would bolt to the foot, so it wasn't kind of completely floating around, and it had some degree of adjustability in it so we could shore everything up. The next thing we did was, with everything clamped and spaced, was to put a laser level along things. So the block of aluminium on the right of the drawing, the steel rule went down into the gap. That gave me an extension of the face of the gap between the main longitudinal members. Put the steel rule against it, and the laser dot tells me where the laser is. So then when I take the rule and I do the same up on the vertical member, I can see that this all true, essentially. If you don't have a laser level, another way of doing that is with a time-honored piece of string and a plumb bob, as is ably demonstrated there. With everything lined up, we tacked the vertical member in place, cut another piece of box section 3 inches long to clamp between the rails at the other end and keep them spaced, and then more clamps, more spacing, tacked the feet on. You'll notice the tack halfway across the top face of the leg. The reason for that is I'd already trapped the ends, and I was clamping the longitudinal members to stop them bowing the horizontal plane. But by tacking there, where you tack, it tries to the weld tries to pull the metal in as it cools, so it shrinks. It would have tried to bend down, and it would have had to bend down, and the top face of the leg is preventing it from doing that, so that help keeps it straight. That is repeated all the way along. Then we came back and tacked the inside face. The next thing was we took the laser level and shone it along the jig at the same old block of aluminium and drew a line on it where the laser point met the block of aluminium. So then we could shove that all the way up the other end of the jig, and lo and behold, the laser spot was still on the Sharpie mark on the block of aluminium. So that looked pretty good. The next thing we had to do was to make the steering head fixture. Turned out the way I drew it, you'd have had to cut a big lump off of the front corner for it to pivot, and the stud bar would have hit the upright section, so I actually ended up making it the other way around because I spotted that before I made it. This is some 20mm all thread, some 20mm nuts, and a 3 inch long piece of 3x2 solid steel bar. This is some 4 inch, I believe, by quarter that I was using for the side plates for the steering head arrangement to get the curved slot in it. Basically mark the pivot hole, scribe the arc with the dividers, mark your two endpoints, centre pop them, and then mark the centres off at the hole diameter. So there we go, scribed it. As you can see, it's the other way around from the drawing. Set the dividers, mark the sheet out, and then use the same, without adjusting the dividers, mark the block out as well, because you want this the same. Its actual distance isn't that necessary. To make sure the holes drilled in the same place on the two plates, I tacked them together. I mean, thoroughly lined them up, and then drilled the holes. To drill the holes, I was using the same techniques I used for the rear axle plates on the CB750. Knock the chuck out of the drill press, and use a Morse taper drill straight in the drill press. Come out to the hole in steps, and there you go. Next step was drilling the pilot holes for the adjusting slot, drilling them out bigger, drilling them out full size, finding them out. There you go, checking it for operation. And the next point was bolting it up on the jig to check it for operation, and discovered the bottom corner hit the bloody stud. So that had to get radiused off. Centre of the top face, getting it centre across the top face was the important bit. The distance along is a bit irrelevant, but you do want your headstock fixture to end up in the middle of the jig, and with the headstock stud fitted to the block. The point about that is that with the jig levelled and that spirit level magnetically attached to the piece of all thread, wherever you put that all thread around, wherever you put the spirit level around the all thread, the bubble should stay in the middle, which is the key thing. And luckily it did, otherwise you're back to making another block. Then the next thing to do was to make the rear axle plate mounting. This version was horribly complicated, so I didn't do it at all. What I did was I cut two more bits of the 3x2 box, because after all there's quite a bit of it left over, and drilled a shorter piece with two sets of holes that were spaced to match my axle plates. The general idea was that the setup, this L-shaped setup like this, means that you could position the slot and the axle plates directly over the legs of the jig, which is inevitably where you're going to want to put them. This is using the jig base as a jig, or a fixture even, to weld up the axle plate fixture. This is a piece of 1.25" box that went down inside it, so that it got tacked in place so that you didn't crush the faces of the 3x2 and could tighten up against it. That was the attachment, made up some inch by inch angle iron using 5/16 8mm all thread and nuts. There's another view of that. Basically the two top pieces keep it fixed in place vertically. The bottom piece stops it from tipping over reasonably well, but in the fullness of time it's better to use a clamp on the other face of the other crossways piece of angle iron when you're doing that. There it is, all in position with a couple of axle plates sorted out. And the next bit of the jig is something to support the lower frame rails and the engine. So there's a rather nasty drawing of that, the principle of the thing. What I ended up using was another couple of pieces of 3x2 box with some 1" by 8 wall, paying particular attention to make sure they were dead square across the jig, and dead central, because then that gives you a useful point to measure things from the end of those attachments. There's the completed thing. Steering head fixture moves up and down, and the rake's adjustable independently of the height. There's a couple of crossways fixtures that allow you to position the bottom frame rails, and the axle plates are positioned. So to go back to my drawing of the CB750 frame, you can see that why I allowed an inch under the frame rails, because it gives you the measurements from the top face of the jig as opposed to any other sort of nominal point. And measuring from the front of the headstock back, well, if you measure from the upright to the headstock, then you have a number you just have to add on for how far along the jig you need to go to find the position of the part or piece you're positioning. And that was it. So I think this was why we built the jig. Access 650 frame, needed too much rake to fit on the old one, and as you can see, it was quite high above the jig as well, so the stick was too short and it would have ended up in the middle of the next county. That's getting everything sat around the frame. Top tube assembly built much the same way as I did the CB750. Lift the engine out so you can fully weld the centre post and cross tie at the bottom. There's the engine back in the frame, located on the jig while I do the engine mounts, and the headstock brace tubes in there as well. And there it is, up on its wheels, ready for completion. I don't think I've ever seen this finished, to be honest. It kind of went away and that was the last I saw of it. Maybe it'll appear again someday. So that's how I built my frame jig all those years ago, and as you will see in the CB750 video part 4B, I'm still using it. Do you need it? Well, if you're going to build one frame, no, because you can weld up some fixtures that you can screw to a bench top and hold the headstock and the axle plates in place, and you can measure stuff from lines you've drawn on the bench. So no. But on the other hand, by the time you've made all those fixtures, it's only slightly less hassle than it is making the jig. And when you come to do a second frame, if it's different, then the jig's adjustable. So for my money, I'd make the jig, because if you make the frame, it makes making the frame easier. If you never make another one again, you can always sell the jig on eBay, and at the end of the day, if you can't get the jig straight, what chance have you got of getting the frame straight? And it's cheaper to build the jig than it is to build the frame. So build the jig first, see how it goes. If you get it right, you get it right. If not, cut up, make some shelves out or something. If you've got this far, thanks for watching. If you've not been massively annoyed by this, then feel free to subscribe. If you liked it, then hit the like, because that helps. And take care. See you in the next one.